what we wanted to do was create a platform and a place where Chinese medicine could be explained on its own terms. This is what it is, and try and explain what that language is and why it sounds different and what it's trying to achieve. So that was a part. It was sort of a few different storylines. One was explaining the onset of Chinese medicine in the UK and how that progressed, and then another part of it was trying to explain, well, what is this medicine and what is it trying to do?
I'm Michael Max, and this is Qiological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. All too often, even though I'm loath to admit it, I lean on blame. I use it to take the focus off my character flaws. I use it to justify my lazy behavior. I use it to draw attention away from my part in the troubles at hand. I think often enough it comes down to this. Something surprises me. Truth is, I don't like being surprised, which is kind of funny because I like to think of surprise as fun and delightful, a little gift from the universe. There are those kind of surprises, and yes, they also disrupt things, but maybe only disrupt things in a small way. Not enough to have the ego in charge feel threatened or disrespected. That's when blame kicks in with, well, if not for that, or it's not my fault because, or my favorite, that's not fair. Especially that last one, that's not fair. When that goes floating through my mind, I know I'm on thin ice. And it's better to wake up to the reality of something in the situation that I'd not seen or considered. Watch for the target of my blame, because that's just the thing that likely needs a bit of repair. The other day I was helping a friend measure something, and it turns out it was longer than the new 16-foot self-locking press a button to retract it type tape measure. Once that tape all paid out, that fancy click to retract, it refused to work. Couldn't coax it back in with a gentle nudge, and adding a bit of what verged on brute force, that didn't help either. Surprise! Can you guess what went through my mind? Cheap bit of kit, followed by, well, that was cheap, so I could probably go buy another one. Well, that's just adding insult to injury. Cheap bit of kit. Not, I wasn't paying attention. Nope. I was the poor craftsman blaming my tools. My pal said something about taking it apart to clear the jam. He's kind of a good old boy. Southern, really. Old school, too. He offered me some Phillips head screwdrivers to investigate the matter, but this fancy new tape measure, it had smaller, more delicate screws holding it together. My toolkit, I've got a range of sizes because I found a deal on Amazon, and while I was only looking for a couple of commonly used slot-in and Phillips heads tools, it turns out it was less expensive to buy a whole set that included some jeweler-sized screwdrivers. There are some of the little things that bang around in my toolbox and often come up in my hand when I'm looking for the beefier sized tool. In fact, I'd been thinking about thinning out the toolbox, taking out the stuff it seems that I never use. But on those rare occasions when you need it, it is mightily satisfying to have it. It's quite something how these tape measures are made. It has a spring that connects to the yellow measuring tape, so you have to hold it just so that it doesn't jump out of the case like a jack-in-the-box. The attention and the pressure involved, not unlike feeling the surrounding tissue of an acupuncture point as you're applying a needle and looking for a response. I'm not sure why the tape would not retract, but once I took it apart and fished around with it a bit, again, kind of like fishing for chi, the thing began to rewind itself. Matte black retraction spring, yellowing measuring tape. Turns out the dang thing is all taiji yin-yang and how it works. Simple mechanics, really, and right there in my hand, the principles we use every day in our work. It did go back together right smartly, and it got me thinking about how surprise and blame are not unlike the yellow tape and the black rewind spring. Two sides of a dynamic that work together by working against each other. Helpful to know, now that I know, when I'm thrusting out that yang would blame of the gallbladder. Looking for a target for my discomfort, it might be helpful to start with how I've just been surprised and bring some pericardium inquisitiveness and investigation to the matter at hand. I've been thinking about what surprise does to the qi. Seems to me it has an upward and outward feeling to it, which very much is a gallbladder direction. It can startle and descend into the kidney sphere. It can bring happiness and radiate into the center of the chest. Surprise is a potent energy. And I had the delightful surprise of Zoe Coldham reaching out to me to tell me about a documentary that she'd created that goes into the early days of acupuncture finding its way into the mainstream of British culture. As you probably know, Qiological has been doing a little mini-series on acupuncture's journey to the West as well. So I was keen to have her on to hear her perspective and what she's discovered. We'll get into all of this in just a moment. Stay with us. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AcuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Zoe Coldham, welcome to Qiological.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I am delighted. You are a multimedia person. You made a film.
I did make a film. Yes, that is correct. I am the director of the documentary Journey to the West, which is a film that's about Chinese medicine's journey into Western culture and how it sometimes struggles to fit in and find legitimacy in a context that's very different from its authentic self.
Its authentic self. Okay, that's provocative. And I get you, and I think anybody listening to this will understand that Asian medicine in a Western context, it's like, okay, what the hell is that? And how does that fit in or not fit in? And yeah, so, I mean, there's those of us who practice it, like me, and some folks that you know, no doubt. And then there's the wider cultural milieu that we're looking at. I am really excited to talk to you about this because, well, for one, here on Qiological, I've been doing what I call a history series. I've been talking to folks who were there in the beginning before they really knew there was a beginning, right? They were creating something. They didn't even know they were creating it. They were just following a hunch or a passion or a dream or maybe a delusion. Who knows? But they were following something and a profession emerged. But the medicine's been here a long time, you know, with the immigrant cultures. And, you know, cultures just, they kind of blend into one another anyway. You know, if there's any kind of openness to the culture and society, then they blend into each other. So you're not an acupuncturist, you're a media person, you're a filmmaker. How would you describe yourself?
Yeah, I think that's how I would describe myself. I also dabble in photography, but I would say I'm a filmmaker and predominantly I make documentaries and have always throughout my career been drawn to stories of underrepresented communities because I'm a firm believer in if there's someone that's misrepresented or underrepresented, then that leads to a misunderstanding and then therefore a lack of acceptance. So if you bring awareness to that group of people and create understanding, then that's going to lead to greater acceptance. And so they're the sort of stories I'm drawn to when I'm making films. And yeah, that's very much what this film was intending to do.
Fabulous. Now, Journey to the West, that's an interesting name. There's a very famous Chinese story, Journey to the West. It's a story told over and over again. If you spend any time in China, there's at least 2 different TV stations that are probably running a soap opera of that story.
Yeah, I think it was such an apt title, really, because as probably lots of people listening will know, the story of Ming Dynasty monkey who goes to India, which is west of China, and in pursuit of some Buddhist texts, and then goes on a particular journey on the way. But we just thought that title really represented the transition of Chinese medicine over to the West as well, and how information can travel so far. And then also on a different layer, it's a story about Chinese medicine's journey to the West and what occurs, what changes when you make that journey, how you then fit into the new place where you arrive.
Like any immigrant story. What sparked your initial interest in this particular topic?
Well, that's a really good question. So, as I said, I'm a filmmaker and I am from Australia, but I actually have dual citizenship in England. So I had decided to go and live in London for a while. And my auntie also lives in London. and she is very much embedded in the acupuncture community. So one of the schools, the London School of Acupuncture, which was set up in the early 80s, and that was set up by a group that had gone to China, studied in China, come back and witnessed that the UK, the colleges weren't teaching Chinese medicine in the way that they are in China. So they wanted to set up a school that was going to be doing that. And it was also a group of, acupuncturists setting up a school. So in terms of their educational skill set, they didn't have as much in that regard. So my auntie Sybil Coldham, so same last name, she came on board and helped them to set up the school and set up the educational part of that school. And so the London School of Acupuncture was having its 35th anniversary, and she got me along to film the anniversary. And part of that day was a lot of discussions around where the profession is at that time. The school had actually just been closed down from the university, so there was no longer going to be Chinese medicine stream within that university. So yeah, I think at the event there was a lot of discussion around what does the future for Chinese medicine look like in the UK. And from my perspective, I just saw a group of really intelligent people who are obviously very good at what they do, talking about lots of different instances where they're met with certain roadblocks or not accepted for what I could see as no real good reason. And coming from Australia, I think Chinese medicine is a lot more accepted. In a general sense, if I said to someone, oh, I'm getting acupuncture, it seems like a normal course of healthcare. People don't really bat an eyelid, whereas over there...
Not weird in Australia.
Not weird in Australia, whereas in the UK, and what I've come to realise is it's a bit more fringe. It's a bit more, oh, that's a bit different, or that's alternative. Anyway, so at this event, I just sort of thought, well, what's going on here? It's different to Australia, and Australia is a Western culture, quite similar to the UK. So I was very curious about why this was, and my auntie and I got to talking, and the school had always had a trust set up to go towards increasing awareness and understanding of Chinese medicine, and they had wanted to write a book about the history of the school and about this journey of Chinese medicine to the UK. And we got to talking and actually decided to make a film and to start to investigate why Chinese medicine was often met with this question of, does it work? Why are people asking that?
Well, there's a damn good reason for why they ask the question, does it work? They didn't grow up with it. It's weird. I mean, if you're a kid and you don't feel well and your mom makes you a nice soup, oh, and I feel better now, or they make you, tea with a little honey and, oh, my throat's better. You're like, oh yeah, that stuff works. But if you didn't have an auntie who did acupuncture or an uncle who had herbs for you, rightly so, you should look at it and go, wait, some thin needles? You're going to do what? Right? So, there's a reason for that. We're going to get into more of this in just a second. I just want to unpack what you've already shared with us. So, a group of acupuncturists, this is like a joke, a group of acupuncturists walk into a bar. A group of acupuncturists come back from China and realize the way that they've been taught in the UK is not the way they're teaching it in China. They learn some things and they're like, okay, well, we're going to teach it this way. Here's the thing about most acupuncturists. Some are very organizationally facile, let's say, they're good with organization, but many of us are not, right? We're like herding cats. So it sounds like your auntie, Sybil, that woman could organize. And so she was the glue. Let me see if I have this right. She was like the glue that held these weirdos together so that they could actually have a school. Is that a fair characterization?
I think maybe you're right about that. I think, and I'm quite interested to hear from you why you think that is a generalization of acupuncturists, why you think that's a characteristic of them to be this kind of disorganized group.
Well, no, it might be. It might be. Look, I consider myself not very disorganized. I'm high in trait openness, and so there's like a lot of things that really have my attention. when it comes to fine detail, I really like someone else to take care of that. Like, I paint with a very broad brush. I like my broad brush, and I can paint some good stuff. I can open up a lot of great ideas. Don't ask me to do the details. I'm happy to build something. Don't ask me to maintain it. All right? So we all have different characteristics.
Absolutely, yeah. And you're not a homogenous group, that's for sure.
Exactly. And I think anyone who's a pioneer, they're probably really good at that. Let's create something, but sit down and write all the documentation for the authorities so that you get rubber stamps. Maybe not.
Yeah, well, but then again, if you look at it another way, and I'm not too sure about the influx of Chinese medicine in the US, but in the UK, these people, they created the profession, and there was a hell of a lot of organization that needed to be involved to be able to do that. They did it off. They were all volunteers. They took all their time, and one of the main things they were trying to achieve was statutory regulation. So there's a huge amount of organization that needs to go into that. So, and that wasn't, that wasn't my auntie wasn't doing all of that for them. That was a group of very hardworking acupuncturists who pretty much almost got that off the ground. Statutory regulation was very close to getting through in the UK and didn't. And the reason it didn't was because of, they tried twice and it just never really quite got there. And that was another thing that I found really interesting, because it just seemed to me there was a prejudice at play, and that's why it didn't get through. Anyway, so they are capable of being organized, but I guess when it comes down to it, places of education require more than just knowledge transfer. You need to have a whole system. And Sybil was perfect in setting that up and helping them get their head around how that all functioned. And for that reason, she was almost the perfect person to be telling. So this is a film. I'm the director and Sybil's the writer and producer, and she was the perfect person to be telling this story because she was within it. But she also had that perspective of not being an acupuncturist, so not being too close to the information. And yeah, together I think we were able to look at what these group of acupuncturists did from the outside a little bit, but also be embedded within them, because rightfully so, I think people who teach, practice or study acupuncture can be a bit wary of people telling their story, because quite often what they do gets misrepresented and there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of vitriol towards the profession. So I think it was important that somebody that they trusted was telling the story.
Here in the States, and this was before I became an acupuncturist, but I've talked to enough folks, there was kind of a self-organizing thing that happened as people began to learn the medicine, realize that they wanted to practice it, realize they wanted to be a part of the greater healthcare system. There was an emergent moment, it seems, where folks came together, created organizations, got schools accredited, got licensure laws passed. And here in the United States, we don't have one monolithic healthcare system like they do in the UK. And so in some ways, I think that worked to the benefit of the profession because there was a little more room, so to speak. But I'm not an expert in that kind of thing, and other people tell that story better than I do. I'm just kind of chronicling that story. But what I'm really curious about, and one of the reasons why I wanted to have you in on this conversation, partly because you're outside the profession, but you're looking into it. You're looking from the point of view as a filmmaker. You're looking from the point of view of someone who wants to tell stories and look at parts of society, like you say, underrepresented or perhaps somewhat misunderstood or just kind of interesting. Like, what's the story of these people over here? Which is not a bad way to go through your day, right? So I'd love to get your take as someone who's connected but on the outside. What did you see and what do you see in terms of acceptance of the medicine? Like you said, in Australia, not particularly weird. In the UK, a little bit strange. So what's your sense around this?
And how would you characterize it in the US?
In the US, at this moment in time, I would say not particularly strange. I live in the Midwest of the United States. It's conservative here, which makes it a great place to practice Chinese medicine because we don't have a lot of acupuncturists, but a lot of people are looking for this kind of help these days. Like 20 years ago, the folks would have been like, nope, that's just too weird. And for sure, you've got people that it's just too strange. But I don't think there's anybody who has not heard of acupuncture. Many people will talk to me about it, just informally, cocktail parties and things, dinner parties. And we'll say, yeah, I heard about it, and I haven't heard anything bad. So I would say it's at this point, 2024, it's in the culture. It's not mainstream, but neither is it fringe. If you live on one of the coasts, everyone's got an acupuncturist on one of the coasts.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. There's a lot to speak about in this with your question. I think definitely in the UK, it does seem to be more fringe. And one of the people we interviewed, actually, and he sums it up really well. He talks about how the adoption or the interest in acupuncture ebbs and flows with how China is perceived. And I think he's been working in Chinese medicine and studying it since the 1970s. And that's when he described the UK as almost a paradise of Chinese medicine. Lots of people were studying there. It was easy to get a license. Everything was really flourishing. And then it sort of declined from there. And I would say at the moment, and it was very interesting. So we set out to make this film and started talking about it in late 2019, early 2020. And in fact, our first interviews were set to be done in March 2020, which I'm sure nobody has forgotten was quite an iconic moment in the history of the pandemic. And so, yeah, we had to postpone, as everyone had to postpone everything in March 2020. And really, that was actually quite a blessing that we didn't do the interviews before the lockdown, because the story morphed and changed with the pandemic, because everybody's thinking around health completely changed. And all of a sudden there was a real spotlight on health. And there was a spotlight on China because that was the origin of the virus. And there was, people were trying to find, the root cause. Was it pangolin scales from which are used in Chinese medicine? I know they're no longer a part of the pharmacopoeia, but they're still sold on the black market.
Well, they are a part of the pharmacopoeia. It's a part that it's a part of the pharmacopoeia, but anyone with any kind of ethical sense will find something else to use besides that particular material.
And the same with tiger bone and rhino horn. And I'm not sure what it was like in the US, but...
And then there's always the people who will go get it on the black market because they want it. But yeah, there are things that have medicinal properties, but in the modern moment, most of us would choose not to use. But there was that thing. Did it come from a laboratory? Did it come from a wet market? All kinds of things can come from a wet market. Have you ever been to a Chinese wet market?
No, I haven't. But I can imagine.
Yeah, it's a little bit mind-blowing, but everything's really fresh. Let me tell you, it's fresh.
Right. Okay. I believe it. Yeah, the whole story changed, and there was even a newspaper heading from Boris Johnson about demented Chinese medicine, something like that. So that couldn't have been helpful for how Chinese medicine was perceived in the UK at that moment.
Depends on how you feel about Boris Johnson.
That's true.
No, I'm serious. Some people come out with something ludicrous, and the people that are their followers go, oh yeah, that demented Chinese medicine. And other people go, oh yeah, that demented Boris Johnson.
Yeah. Maybe you're right. But I think still that sometimes these, and the media is so vitriolic in the UK, and it kind of just washes over people. And Chinese medicine doesn't yet have that strong standing in the UK where people will question the vitriol. So it's an interesting one. And also in terms of the healthcare system in the UK, yeah, as you said, it's got the NHS, which is just one free service for all. And to get into the NHS, you basically have to be recommended, and you have to be recommended by a company called NICE, or that's the acronym. So it's the National Institute of Clinical Excellence. And they do clinical trials, basically. They do other sorts of evidence-based testing, but it's mainly clinical trials. And so in order to get recommended, you have to do well in these trials. And it's, as you might be aware, the issue with testing acupuncture in a clinical control trial is, what do you do when you're trying to be inactive? What is going to be the placebo version of acupuncture? And they basically test the outcome of real acupuncture against this sham version of acupuncture, which is still sticking needles in, basically. So the difference isn't going to be too large. And so because of that, acupuncture struggles to be recommended within these guidelines. But interestingly as well, where it does do well is when Western medicine is struggling. And when I say struggling, I mean struggling to find an answer. And that happens a lot with chronic illnesses and pain and things like that. And yeah, sometimes you see this shift where when Western medicine can't find the answer, it kind of opens this door for Chinese medicine to reveal itself. And that actually happened originally in the late 80s, early 90s during the AIDS crisis in the UK, where, Western doctors were flummoxed and they didn't know what to do. And because of the way Chinese medicine works, they're able to approach any person at any moment, and they're just going to be treating that person and their constitution and what's showing up. So they had some amazingly effective treatments for people struggling with AIDS and also people struggling with the horrible side effects of some drugs. And there was a clinic set up called the Gateway Clinic in London, and, GPs, doctors started hearing about this clinic, and they would be sending people there, and which was basically integration between Western and Chinese medicine, and it was working brilliantly. And because of that, historically now that Gateway Clinic still exists, and it's one of the only acupuncture clinics embedded within a hospital, and that was able to stay there because of all the great work they did. And so that's what I mean about when Western medicine's struggling, it kind of provides a gateway for Chinese medicine to come in. And that recently happened in the UK in regards to pain and the management of pain and the awareness that opioids create a lot more issues than they do than helping people. So Chinese medicine was recently recommended for pain, and opioids and gabapentinoids were actually taken off. So this is a long answer to say the perception of Chinese medicine is in flux, and someone describes it in the film as being, it's a yin-yang experience. Sometimes it's up and everyone's talking about it, and then sometimes there's a dull period and it's changing.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code Qiological for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Yes, I think there's probably cycles like that we've seen here in the United States as well. Back in the early 70s, there was James Rustin, who had emergency appendectomy, and the story goes two ways. Some say he had anesthetic for it. Others say they used acupuncture for post-surgical pain relief. I think it was the second, but the story gets told in different ways. It's funny, origin stories have a way of taking on and generating their own kind of mythology around them. But the important point is that was an inflection point where a lot of people, is like all of a sudden, everyone in the United States, not everyone, but a lot of people, they're looking at China, they're looking at acupuncture, and it really brought it into a lot of people's awareness. I think we had a similar thing during the AIDS crisis. It was a moment. And then we have things like in our more modern time, you'll see like football players getting acupuncture, and there'll be a big buzz around that because some famous football player got acupuncture, and there's that. So yes, there are the big cultural moments where it comes into everybody's awareness. But it seems to me that the other way that this stuff gets into the culture is like water seeping into dry ground. Okay, or like the way that cultures just kind of blend into each other. So let me give you an example. Back in the early 80s, I lived in Seattle. I worked at a place called the Pike Place Market. A lot of people were selling arts and crafts on these day tables there. I was one of them. And I had some friends, early 80s. If they had a healthcare issue, they'd go up on Beacon Hill to Dr. Lee, I think his name was. There's some acupuncture dude, right? I don't know where he was from. He put needles in people's ears and sent them home with bags of bark. And like a lot of my friends went there to get herbs and acupuncture. And this is in the early 80s. Now, granted, I'm hanging around with a bunch of fringy artists. So, there's that. But it's also it's right there on the West Coast. It's open toward the Pacific, it's on the Pacific Rim. It's open to Asia. We've had that mainstream American culture blending with Asian culture for a long time in that area. And a group of young people, they're trying acupuncture because, well, we don't have a lot of money for one. And secondly, we're just kind of open to stuff. I remember going to see that cat because I had some issues going along. This could have been a moment for me to go, wow, acupuncture, amazing. But he never gave me a single needle, and he didn't give me any herbs. He said, here, press on these points on your head. That's all you need to do. I thought he was just a quack. It's like, really? I'm here for acupuncture. Like, give me the needles like my friends. But no. Press these points on your head. So I wrote it off. Now, I might have missed a fantastic opportunity, but at that moment I wrote it off. But again, what I'm speaking to here is people coming to the medicine because maybe they're not particularly mainstream in the first place, or they're looking for something that's less expensive, or they're just not interested in Western medicine. Maybe it hasn't helped them. It's failed them, actually. And so they go looking for something else. And I have found in my time as an acupuncturist, I'm rarely the first stop on anybody's schedule. I'm the third or the fourth, maybe the fifth. They've tried things that are more mainstream, more acceptable, more part of the culture. And when those don't work, then you try something else.
Yeah, that is a very common way that people come to acupuncture. Absolutely. And is that what you mean by it seeping in?
That's what I mean by it seeping in. Person by person, moment by moment. Really, in a sense, failure by failure. If the mainstream system has failed somebody, they're going to go look for something that's different, right? They may look for chiropractic. They may look for some kind of body work. They may look for, energy healing, whatever that is. They may look for acupuncture. They may look for Ayurvedic. there's all kinds of different things out there these days. But I think most humans, in their way of going about figuring things out, if something don't work, you try something else.
Yeah, it's very true. And I guess what struck me, and you asked before about how I perceived the acupuncture community, and something that struck me was they just keep practicing and persevering, and they believe so strongly in what they're doing. And I mean, as they should. It's a very valid form of healthcare. But for a group, especially in the UK, that is so often met with suspicion, I think it could sometimes be hard to just keep going, but they just continue to keep going. And I think a big part of that is because patients keep coming to them, and they continue to be able to provide support for these patients and help them, and help people that, may have gone through a lot of rounds of Western medicine that has failed. And I think that's why acupuncture will continue, because it's working for a lot of people.
I would agree. So on one hand, look, you were talking earlier about the national healthcare system in the UK. They've got these evidence-based procedures they want to take people through. They want to do some research to prove that something's real. Fair enough. Look, you want to be effective with whatever you're doing. I get it. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's a good idea to use effective methods. And the thing about acupuncture, at least in my experience, it seems to work well enough, often enough, that it's worth getting out of bed in the morning and doing the work. Now, does it cure everything all the time? Does it help all people at all times? Of course not, because nothing does.
Yeah, of course. And that's a big point. Western medicine doesn't.
You need the right tool for the right job. There's things acupuncture does really well. There's some things it's not so great at. And there's things Western medicine does extremely well. Some things, again, not so great at. My suspicion is when it comes to acupuncture, the kind of people that have been drawn to do this work, again, just my suspicion, working hypothesis, we weren't looking to be in the mainstream anyway. Now, that might be different for younger people these days who want to go work in a hospital. Maybe they do want to be mainstream. I came into it in the 90s. There were other people that came into it in the 70s and 80s. Those people were not looking to be mainstream, right? Like, hey, I got a nice mainstream desk job for you. They'd be like, yeah, no. So I think some of it is because people that are drawn to the work, we're happy to be on the edges. We wanted to be on the edges. We were not looking to be at the top of the bell curve. Now, again, in this moment, maybe people are looking to be in the mainstream and they want to try to bring acupuncture into the mainstream. Well, that's different than people 40 years ago. I'm not saying one's better than the other or that one is right, the other's not. Different needs for different times.
That's a really interesting point. I hadn't actually thought of it in that way, that these people didn't want to be in the mainstream. I think it would be good to have the option, you know? You can go and work in a hospital and treat patients with acupuncture within a hospital, or you can have your own private practice and remain sort of more on the fringe. I do think that it would be good and just beneficial to people to have acupuncture more integrated. So if you went to a doctor and you had migraines, maybe the first port of call would be to see a Chinese medicine practitioner first. And then you go from there, and then maybe you see a neurologist after that. I think I would like that to be how acupuncture was integrated in society. And as well, like Western medicine doesn't really do much at all in the way of prevention and addressing people's lifestyles. And I think that's a huge part of healthcare, or it should be. And I think Chinese medicine's really good at that. It's working with the patient to... Am I incorrect?
Well, the lifestyle thing. I think one of the attractions of Western medicine is we've got a treatment for you and we can help you, and we're not going to ask you to make many changes with your life. Like, just do what you're doing. We're not going to ask you to change. We're going to help you change your health without changing your lifestyle. You know what? That sounds great. How many people really want to change their lifestyle? I mean, honestly, how many people want to change their diet in a big way? Not many that I've met. And in the years that I've done acupuncture and in East Asian medicine, I mean, I remember when I first started out, like, oh yeah, I got all kinds of great lifestyle advice and there's different things you can do. And I think I was more annoying to people than helpful because they didn't want to change the way they ate. And they liked the way that they spent their day. They didn't want to add in something that was different, or they didn't want to change their exercise, or maybe they didn't want to exercise. Actually, I'd love to live the way I'm living, but, don't ask me to exercise. Can you help me live better without exercising? And so, we have this idea that, and in a way, yes, okay? Because while we like to pride ourselves on, we can help you with your lifestyle, I don't think most people really want to change what they do. At the end of the day, can I keep doing what I'm doing and somehow get away with it? So yes, we have ways of helping people with that, but I don't know if humans are really geared to that. I think one of the real attractions of Western medicine is we can help you without too much effort on your part.
Absolutely. But I'd love it to be another way. Because I think there can be something so amazing about learning how to almost treat yourself through your diet and lifestyle changes. And if you're open to it, I think that Chinese medicine is really good at that. Learning to get more in touch with your body. And
I completely agree.
And maybe my hope is that if it was more integrated, that idea would become more mainstream and people would be more open to. Because, for me, through making this documentary, at the start, I knew very little about Chinese medicine. And then come to now, I know a little bit more. I'm obviously no expert at all. But I had so many penny drop moments. And in particular, reading Ted Kaptchuk's The Web That Has No Weaver, which is a book I'm sure a lot of listeners have read. It's a whole different way of viewing, it's a different worldview and a different way of viewing the body. And I find it fascinating. And I think if you absorb some of that or take on some of that, you can live a much healthier existence. And even the whole world, it just makes so much sense. And it's kind of so simple in a way. But yeah, people don't understand that if they don't understand Chinese medicine. And to them, it just sounds kind of weird. all the language is very difficult for people to wrap their heads around. And that's part of the problem.
Well, it is weird. It is weird. It's totally weird. The first book that I ever read on Chinese medicine was The Web That Had No Weaver. My acupuncturist recommended it to me because I started to get curious. Like this is weird. and she agreed. She's like, yep, it is. I agree. But I wanted to know more, and she gave me The Web That Had No Weaver. I remember reading it and thinking, I'm more confused now than I was when I started, right? And they're using all this dampness and wind, and it's like, okay, it's poetic and that's cool, but like, what the hell am I supposed to do with any of that? Because it's such a different way of thinking about how life is and how things unfold and how problems in the body, it's not just an enzymatic problem someone might have, or a, issue with their anemia, or, whatever, allergies, name your Western problem. Now you're thinking in terms of wind and damp and dryness. I mean, for the average Westerner, it's a little bit insane to think of your body that way because it's so foreign. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's so foreign. How do you begin to wrap your head around it? So you read the book and you came away with a sense of, that's cool. And beyond that, that's doable. That's accessible. You had a very different experience than me. I read the book and I was really put off. Like, I don't know if I'm ever going to understand this crazy shit. But you found some accessibility in it. So I'd like to hear more about how it made things more accessible for you.
It's interesting. We both had different experiences of that book. I think at the start he talks about the wind affecting the head or something. And he talks about how Western medicine has a way of treating wind affecting the head or Western medicine addresses issues with kidney, spleen, or sorry if I'm getting these terms wrong. But I think he was sort of describing how we approach the same thing, but there's a difference in language between those concepts. And I just found that really interesting. Like with yin and yang, I just sort of knew it very, rudimentary. I knew it was the symbol and it was white and black. And I just didn't understand it's about this concept of things changing, and that we have that, when you're hot to cold, or like low energy to high energy, or I don't know, things like that. We have those experiences, and Chinese medicine almost puts a concept to those experiences. And that just made a lot of sense to me. A lot of the things that they were talking about, that Ted writes about in the book, made a lot of sense to how I experience my body and my existence and things like that. And I just found it really amazing that something was even describing that.
Yes. Okay. So he used a language that made sense to you and how you feel in your body.
Yes. And I didn't realize something did that. So that was why I was really like, wow, this is incredible. Because Western medicine, it speaks about disease and how to isolate disease and get rid of it. Whereas it never speaks about how we're experiencing our own bodies, or it's different. And I found that fascinating.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of qi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
It is fascinating. It's 100% fascinating. And it's one of the reasons why I love going to clinic every day that I go to clinic. Because people will walk in and they'll say things that they'll say, this may sound a little crazy. And then they'll say something and I'll be like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And now I know what to do for you as well. So when I was in school, there was this one passage about, I think it was kidney yang deficiency, where a person says, I feel like I'm sitting in water wearing a belt of, cold metal made of coins or something like that. Okay, that's an interesting image, and it's written in an old Chinese book. But I remember at one point someone coming in and saying, well, I feel like I'm sitting in water. I got this metal belt around my waist. Like, oh my God.
Wow.
Have you told anybody this before?
There it is.
There it is. Exactly. Zoe, exactly. There it is. So often people will come in and often they'll have like a Western diagnosis and they think about themselves in their Western diagnosis, which isn't helpful because that's a diagnosis is a noun, but people are verbs. And so when they come in and they're actually talking about how they feel or process that's going on, they usually don't have a label to put on it. They just tell the story, and they feel a little weird about telling the story because, we're weird in the way that we experience our bodies. But I think you're right. The language, and I see it now in the web that has no weaver. I couldn't see it then, but I see it now. That language allows us to help people.
Yeah. And we use some of those passages in the film from Ted Kaptchuk's The Web That Has No Weaver. A big part of the film is trying to explain what Chinese medicine is on its own terms. So a lot of the time, and when I was doing research, a lot of the documentaries or films about Chinese medicine was sort of with this Western view. So it was someone from the Western world coming in and looking at, what is this East Asian medicine? And, looking at maybe the things about it that they think people will find weird and strange and therefore want to watch. And what we wanted to do was create a platform and a place where Chinese medicine could be explained on its own terms. This is what it is, and try and explain what that language is and why it sounds different and what it's trying to achieve. So that was a part. It was sort of a few different storylines. One was explaining the onset of Chinese medicine in the UK and how that progressed, and then another part of it was trying to explain, well, what is this medicine and what is it trying to do?
What is this medicine and what is it trying to do? Yeah, I think all of us that practice this, that's part of what we work with every day with people, finding ways to put it in a language that makes it accessible to the person in front of us.
There's a lot of difference, right, in interpreting that language. And at the start, I was sort of like, why can't we just explain what this is? Because there's so many different explanations sometimes. When we asked our interviewees, what is qi? They just looked at me like, oh, God. Are you really going to get me to explain that? So, yeah, it's a tricky thing to explain.
Okay, so it's tricky and it's a fair question. So you've got a little experience now from doing the film and talking to people and reading Ted's book and thinking about it. You've been very thoughtful in this. How would you describe qi?
Oh dear, I saw that question coming. How would I describe qi? It's kind of, I think the best description I heard was it's kind of like a life force that runs through everything that's living, and it's always kind of moving around, and then it will not be there when you're dead. That's maybe my description of it. I would be interested in how you would describe it, Michael.
I would say that qi is not describable in English. Grasping the understanding of qi with our language using left brain is a fool's errand. Good luck. Qi is a ball well hit. Qi is the smell of blueberry pie on a spring day. Qi is that moment when you think you're going to get a first kiss. Qi is the moment where you realize that a marriage is over. Qi is the way the sky feels at a certain moment. If you open up a Chinese dictionary, like an old paper one, and you look at the character for qi, you'll see qi put with the other characters that it goes with to create words, and there are pages and pages and pages of qi with something else. So like qi si, qi and color is like a person's complexion, right? Tian qi, sky qi, we're talking about the weather. Qi is like an add-on to so many things. It gives it this kind of invigorating, enlivening. Qi turns nouns into verbs. It turns things into processes. That's my sense of qi at this point. This is going to sound corny. It's a little bit like poetry in that you can talk around it and you can get a feel for it, but good luck nailing it down. You will never nail it down. It's like nailing down love. You know it when it's there. It's an inevitable character of life. It's very annoying. So you did this film, and again, you had some motivation behind it, which is you like to take things that are maybe unseen or maybe better put unappreciated and bring some light to it so others can know about it. So I'm curious to know if you have some advice for us acupuncturists. Because, look, we're in it with just the work that we do. Sometimes hard to see how we fit in to the bigger picture. You, like your auntie, come a little bit from the outside, but you're engaged and you're interested. So what would you have to say to the listeners about mainstream culture and Chinese medicine and how those might flow a little more smoothly together? What are our opportunities as acupuncturists in the moment that we're in right now, as you see it?
I think there's real opportunity in, firstly, I think acupuncturists don't really need to do anything differently other than just keep practicing and keep doing what you're doing. I think that the problem the problem mainly is coming from the outside, from the institutions. They're the ones that need to change. But I think there is opportunity, I guess, in those places where maybe Western medicine is letting people down. So the chronic pain area, migraines, things like that. That's where you have an opportunity to do work and, I guess, be recognized for it. Yeah, I think I just see that, particularly in the UK, just such a huge amount of work put into setting up the profession. And now they have a great profession there. And I think if you just keep practicing and keep believing in it, don't get disheartened by the media or institutions pushing you back. Just keep trying at it. Because what I've learned is that if you continue to just practice and talk about it and fight those systems, then you will be eventually let in. And I think the biggest tragedy would be to stop practicing and to move on to something else.
You sound like you're optimistic.
Of course, yeah, I am optimistic because it isn't a great time in some respects for acupuncture in the UK because it's now been pushed out of all the universities and it's no longer being taught within universities. There is some avenues to get a university degree from it. But I can just see that historically it has ebbed and flowed and it's been around for 2,000 years. Like, it's not going anywhere. So you may as well just keep working at it and be a part of the group of people that are working on acupuncture. And there's going to be more that can be done with integrating with Western medicine. I think Western medicine can learn a huge amount from Chinese medicine. And I would love to see that happen more and more. So yeah, I'm absolutely optimistic. But I guess I'm not within, I'm not in it. So maybe that's why.
Well, it helps to stand outside. It gives you a perspective. It's interesting for me to hear that the schooling systems in the UK, it's been done through the universities, it's being squeezed out there. Here in the colonies, here in the States, increasingly we have very influential schools that are closing down. So in some ways, there's a parallel thing going on between what's happening in the UK, what's happening in the States in terms of education. I don't know what's going on in Australia.
It's happening in Australia as well.
It's happening in Australia as well. Okay. So there's a global retreat almost in a way with the education. Is this a cause of concern? Sure, of course. Is it the end? Well, it's hard to tell the difference between things falling apart and falling together. So maybe there's some new opportunities that are in the midst of arising. It's a little hard to see them right now, but certainly it sounds like the educational structures that have gotten us to where we are today, those are unraveling. That sounds pretty clear. Again, and maybe I'm putting you on the hot seat, but because you're looking from the outside, given that there's a big change in the education, where might other opportunities be in terms of gaining or creating an acupuncture education or taking the profession forward? Have you got any ideas, any dreams, any glimmers?
I guess the issue with it being pushed out of the university courses is that there's no longer the avenues for research. And research is a really important part of developing the acupuncture profession, because that's how you can do well in those control trials or have different ways of proving, in inverted commas, proving that acupuncture works. what other avenue was the question? What other avenues are there for education?
Yeah, like what other avenues might there be? So you just mentioned the problem with being pushed out of the universities is loss of access to research. But I can tell you, and I'm not a researcher, I got friends that love research, but as a clinician, I don't care about research. It doesn't really change what I do at all. What changes what I do is the experience that I have with my patients in terms of how they get better. So there's a clinical sensibility. It is not dependent on research whatsoever.
Well, and that's the thing. So the university courses are closing down. And yeah, that does have a huge impact on acupuncture and its acceptance to society. But like you say, it doesn't really have an impact on how you practice. And there are still a lot of colleges that are set up that are still teaching acupuncture. It's just not, I guess, attached to universities or to these big institutions. I guess it's the same with hospital, not being embedded in Western medicine and in hospitals and things like that. That also doesn't affect your ability to practice and to develop your practice and learn more. In a way, I guess, maybe this is not right for me to say, but to become a part of the Western culture or the biomedical context, I'm sure there would have to be some shift towards that Western way of treating that, and acupuncture and Chinese medicine may change in that transition. So maybe it's good to be away from it. There's lots of different ways to look at it, and I'm not saying it's good that the schools are closing. I don't think that, but as long as you're able to still practice and learn and develop your practice, which you still can do, then that's okay.
My suspicion is every generation has its challenges. The folks that your auntie helped to get a school up and running, they had challenges in their day. They met the challenges. Now we're 40 years down the road. It's a different time, different context, right? Cultures change. So what we'll do, I don't know. I appreciate someone who is from the outside, but with curiosity looking in to our profession, saying, yeah, there's options. And I like hearing your optimism.
I'm very optimistic, and I'm just so impressed by every acupuncturist I meet and the profession as a whole. I think you're all fantastic people. And you're so driven and clever and intelligent.
Clever and intelligent. Is that, often we say people are clever, but it doesn't mean we necessarily like them. But no, I get what you're saying. And I would agree that people that are drawn to this, they're passionate about what they do. They care, which I think is a very important thing.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Maybe that's what I find so impressive, is that you care about what you do and you're doing it just for that reason. There's no real other reasons. There's not, with being a doctor, maybe there's like a high paycheck, or there's a status to having that title. Whereas to be an acupuncturist, you just want to be an acupuncturist. And I really respect that.
Well, we also want to get a paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully a nice one. It's good to make a good living. And how do you make a good living in market-based economies? You're helpful and you're useful to people. So I think a lot of acupuncturists, we all share this common sense of wanting to be helpful and useful, which, is a good way to be a contributing member of society. So if people would like to watch this documentary of yours, where do they go?
So you can go to our website, which is journeytothewestdocumentary.com, and that has a link to viewing the film. Or alternatively, it's also on Amazon Prime. So you can search Journey to the West on Amazon Prime, or it's on another streaming service called Tubi, which is TUBI.
Great. I'll make sure all that's on the show notes page, along with anything else you might want to share with the listeners here.
Yeah, fantastic.
Anything else to share, Zoe, before we say goodbye for the day?
Well, I just hope people enjoy watching the film. They feel optimistic about it after watching it, because I think that's been some of the feedback from some acupuncturists that have watched it. They've just let us know that they felt seen and heard and excited to continue practicing and proud of what they've done and what they've achieved as acupuncturists.
Sounds great. Been a real delight to talk with you today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been great to talk to you as well.
Usually here on Qiological, I'm having a conversation with a member of the tribe. It's great getting the perspective of someone who's not part of the trade, a chance to see what they're seeing and hear what they're finding to be connective and important about acupuncture. Do check out the show notes page for a link to her documentary. You'll find out something of our history that you might not have known about and get a glimpse of what it was like back in the early days of acupuncture's journey to the West. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.